Well, we're the Louisiana Chemical Association. We represent the chemical manufacturers in Louisiana. We have about 65 companies that operate at somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 different locations throughout the state. And so we have our members together, give them information about what's going on, what regulatory stuff is happening, the latest in regulatory, as well as legislatively. Today's our annual legislative conference that we have every May when the legislature's in session. Gives us a chance to brief our members on what's going on in the legislature, what bills they will be hearing, and to get their views and input on exactly what we're doing here to make sure that they understand that what the legislature does has an impact on their business. We've got the issue of the industrial tax exemption that the governor changed the rules on and got the locals more involved. And we're not against local involvement, but he did it and did not have a process in place to handle the onslaught. And what has happened is it's slowered economic development. And so we need to fix the process. If you want to keep locals involved, there's a way to do that. We have experts from our companies all over the world that do this. We're saying, look, let's bring these people in. Let's talk about the best way to do that and use best practices that you would do in any business and make this thing work for Louisiana.
It's extremely important to the state in terms of attracting more business and increasing the economy, growing the economy of Louisiana. The administration does a very good job of doing an economic analysis of all the projects that get considered for this, and we support that. It needs to be a payback program for the state of Louisiana. At the same time, it needs to be as aggressive as it can possibly be in order to guarantee that the companies are competitive and they select Louisiana. Because if they don't come to Louisiana, there is no tax exemption. So we think those two things are extremely important to note, and just to keep the economy moving forward, because the chemical industry is such a big driver of jobs in Louisiana.
You talked about expansion. How competitive is it when it comes to expansion for chemical plants in Louisiana when they have to compete against Texas and plants all over the world?
It's very competitive. Louisiana has a lot of natural attractiveness to it with transportation, ports, and things like that, but Texas has every bit as much. Clearly, they're the biggest competitor that we go up against. When my company was looking at making a major expansion, we were talking to different officials, and one of the other states told us, we can't offer you the tax exemptions that Louisiana has because we don't have those taxes. And so Louisiana has to look at what their tax structure is versus the other states and make sure we stay competitive, and ITEP is the way that they do it.
38 other states that have a similar program as our industrial tax exemption program. Because our industry is huge capital investment, capital intensive, they defer the property taxes on the front end for an 8 to 10 year period, and then they begin paying taxes. As you know, industrial property, first of all, is taxed at a higher rate than residential. Residential is at 10%, industrial is at 15%. It's a substantial difference when you're talking about $1 billion investment. And so those are the kinds of things that it does, and it helps to offset some of the other tax issues that we have as a state that make us kind of out of line with other states.
Right now, the chemical industry in Louisiana is focused greatly on competitiveness. In recent years, we have seen increase in business taxes. That has made us less competitive than we would like with neighboring states such as Texas and Georgia and Kentucky. We want to be able to manufacture in Louisiana. We want to be able to provide jobs, but we have to be able to compete for future investment with our neighboring states, particularly across the Gulf South. So taxes are important to us.
Some of the biggest issues facing us in the chemical industry are infrastructure. We've been working for quite some time now for infrastructure improvements, whether it's our roads, our bridges. How do we ensure that employees get from home to work and back safely and time effectively? How can we move our products from our facilities to market? These are issues that have significant impact. We've been working a number of years now for support of infrastructure packages, funding for infrastructure, data-driven plans, and so we continue to support that platform.
We have not invested. Matter of fact, we have neglected our roads and bridges for decades in Louisiana. That is a problem now, and that problem is only going to grow in the next 5 to 10 years as we continue to increase the number of jobs that we provide, as we put more people on the road to go to work every day, and as we increase the outputs of our facilities. We have more trucks on the road. We need to have more highway and bridge capacity in Louisiana, and we are, every day that we don't invest, we're falling further behind.
Railroads, right, continue to be a long-term issue for us. How do we ensure we have competitive pricing? How do we ensure we get great customer service? There's been a lot happening at the federal level with the Surface Transportation Board, trying to bring some of these issues to bear. Meaning, how can we work between the federal government, industry, and the railroad providers to make some improvements?
But workforce development has been something that we've always been involved in for the last 20 years or so, making sure that we have a ready, trained workforce. And that's going to be important as you start to get expansions, and not just in our industry, but across the spectrum of business.
What type of jobs are available in the chemical industry?
Well, we have, first of all, when you look at the construction and building a chemical plant, you have construction jobs, but you have operator jobs. These are jobs that start out roughly making somewhere in the neighborhood of about $80,000 to $90,000 a year, plus health benefits, plus retirement.
We've all seen and we've all experienced significant retirements in our industry. There's knowledge gaps, and we're working hard to fill those gaps. We have craft workforce issues. So there's two things in specific we're doing. One, trying to work with groups like Associated Builders and Contractors, LCTCS, to encourage more people to go into the skilled craft trades so that these folks can come out and work on our industry. We're also partnering with great universities like LSU to recruit top-notch high school students into our university, work with LSU to get an outstanding engineering education, and then come and working for us in the workforce.
This year is very important with statewide elections for all of the governor and the other statewide elected, as well as all the legislature. A number of legislators are term limited, and in fact, historic number of term limit legislators will be leaving office, some running for the other house, but we have many conversations that we need to have with all of those folks about the importance of the chemical industry and its survival to the economy of Louisiana.
What does Louisiana's chemical industry mean to the state and also to the nation?
Well, you know, the chemical industry in Louisiana is not just the plants that you see up and down the river. It's all sorts of providers of all sorts of services who not only sell products to us, but they're restaurants, they're accountants, they're people who help us all survive. So the multiplying effect of the chemical industry in Louisiana is monumental and very important to the survival of the state.
What I'm going to talk about today is a poll that I conducted recently in the governor's race. What is important for the petrochemical industry here in Louisiana is the fact that given that the petrochemical industry not only is across Louisiana and across the nation, but is a multinational kind of industry, what's important is that to operate effectively in Louisiana, you have to have a healthy business climate. And so the healthy business climate to me is one of the issues that could and should be the focus of the gubernatorial debate this year. And so that was one of the issues I explored, in addition, of course, to where the candidates currently stand with regards to the voters.
Before we get into the specifics of the poll, the governor's race, I'd like to provide a little context because you've certainly heard a lot of spin as to how the race is going. I'm going to play devil's advocate and give you the pros and cons of why Governor Edwards could be reelected versus why he may not be reelected. So the first thing that's important to appreciate is if you talk about his approval rating, I'm going to reference a poll by a national outfit called Morning Consult. They basically do polls all 50 states once a quarter. Governor Edwards' most recent approval ratings, it was 47% approved, 32% disapprove. Technically, those are not bad numbers, although it was a slight downtick from his 49 to 30 approval a quarter ago. So and that plus the fact that it's not 50% approval is something that I definitely think is worth paying attention to. One thing I can't emphasize enough, you have the theoretical world of a political candidate, you have the actual world of how that candidate performs under actual conditions. In other words, once the campaign starts, how does he or she do out on the campaign trail? Is this someone who would rather sit in the back room and read books, or is this someone who presses flesh, raises money, is disciplined, et cetera, et cetera? In my opinion, that is an aspect of Governor Edwards which I think is his strength, is that he's willing to do what it takes to raise money and to campaign and do it without complaining. So that's something you definitely cannot discount when you're talking about his chances in his reelection battle. The other thing that in the short term benefits him, or definitely until the day after the primary, is the fact that he has two Republican opponents, whereas he pretty much has the Democratic field to himself. Now, there are to be going to be other Democrats and Republicans running, but I do not believe for a second that they will be serious candidates. And if you are a Democrat of any kind of stature and were to try to take on the governor, you would most likely be getting some calls not only to your donors, but probably the state party and or national party would get involved. So what I'm politely saying is that the Democrats are going to do everything they can to clear the field for Governor Edwards so that he only has to focus on himself rather than fighting off other Democrats before the primary. The Republicans in the short term do not have that luxury. They have two pretty credible people running. Of course, as Jim just mentioned, Congressman Ralph Abraham, he has $1 million in the bank, and businessman and contractor Eddie Risponi, who has $10 million. So those are fairly substantial candidates because one has a regional stature from being a congressman, the other has the money to do what it takes to run a credible campaign. So, but however, to get to the runoff, and I do believe, spoiler alert, there will be a runoff, to get to the runoff, you do have to basically fight each other. Now, I'm of the opinion that since parties typically fight the last battles, that what happened in 2015 when there was a no-holds-barred contest on the Republican side, which in my opinion afflicted some collateral damage on the party with regards to their contest against Governor Edwards, I think there's going to be a concerted effort against that kind of thing happening again, meaning if the conduct between Abraham and Risponi gets too rough, I think that there'll be referees stepping in to kind of break it up, so to speak. And I think, too, to the credit of Abraham and Risponi, I think they realized that because of the extent of the competitiveness of that contest, that perhaps there were some hurt feelings that did not need to be there. So, point being is, even though I think the Republicans will quickly unite, in the meantime, the two have to figure out who's the one to face Governor Edwards in the runoff. That gives Governor Edwards in the short term an advantage. The other thing that I think benefits Governor Edwards, and I'm going to go back in time to 1995. Bill Clinton, for the first time in 40 years, had to deal with a Republican Congress. That Republican Congress campaigned on the contract with America, and they had a fairly aggressive agenda. That agenda basically collided up against what President Clinton wanted to do, and the government got shut down several times in the end of 1995 and 1996. The point of going back in time over 2 decades is to illustrate that if you have philosophical disagreements with the legislative branch, and the legislative branch is not acting in concert with what the majority of voters think, you as the executive can take advantage of that. Bill Clinton did, and he got reelected, when back before those budget fights, few thought he would have. Where I'm going with this is, given that you've had a fairly contentious relationship between the State House and Governor Edwards, I think to some extent he can make political hay out of that, because basically what he can do, or certainly what he will try to do, is paint himself as the reasonable person in the room. So when you're talking about assessing, and y'all do SWOT analyses all the time in your plants, I see this as a strength of Governor Edwards, is he's going to try to play the moderate card. Because even though Louisianians are conservative, they're not into the in-your-face type of conservatism. They really want their executives to get things done, particularly since executives here in Louisiana have a lot of power. The other thing that I think benefits Governor Edwards is this: the economy. More specifically, when he started in 2016, he had dealt with the collateral damage of oil prices crashing in 2014. In a sense, I would argue that other than the economic pain caused, and still being caused, being governor at that point in time is the best thing that could happen to you, because basically if you take over at a time that the economy is at the trough, it could only go up from there, and you get the credit, whether deserved or not. So what that means is that one of the planks that Governor Edwards can make as part of his reelection campaign is to talk about how bad things were and how good things are comparatively now. So that's something you cannot discount in terms of talking points that the governor is going to use. And that's something any incumbent would use, by the way, not just Governor Edwards. I also want to talk, however, having given you the reasons that I think Governor Edwards has some things he could run for re-election on and are his strengths, he does have weaknesses. The biggest weakness, in my opinion, is the T word. Taxes were raised in 2016, and even though they were partially lowered last year, the reality is they were not lowered all the way back to their 2016 level. So you had a very interesting semantic argument that went on last summer when they were talking about, well, I did a tax cut. No, I didn't do a tax cut. Well, I only partially did a tax cut. However you want to spin it, there's only one variable that matters in the end, and that is what Louisiana voters think. My suspicion is I think there's some collateral damage that was inflicted on Governor Edwards from doing what he had to do, or he believed that he had to do in 2016. And that's something that, by the way, is an instant-made talking point that the Republicans could use in their messaging against Governor Edwards, because it's a very easy one to make. He raised taxes, period. That's several commercials right there. So that, to me, is Governor Edwards' biggest vulnerability. You'll notice I put legislative fights both in the pro and the con, deliberate. And here's why. Just as I'm of the belief that Governor Edwards, if he wanted to, could make political hay out of the fights he has had with the legislature, resulting in all these special sessions you've seen, the thing you have to appreciate, and I saw this afflicting former Governor Romer a generation ago, is that as Louisiana, the good and bad of the office of governor is it's a very powerful position. The good is that you can use that power to get things done. The bad is that there's a lot that voters will hold you responsible for. If voters see that you are fighting with the legislature, voters are typically not going to sort out who the good guys and the bad guys are, like in a playground fight where the principal kind of knows who the guilty party is. Voters are going to blame everybody. It's much easier to blame the chief executive than it is to blame individual legislators for the endless wrangling and special sessions that we saw over the last few years. Therefore, I see that as a potential vulnerability for the governor, because all a Republican candidate has to do, in my opinion, is basically make references to gridlock. And since voters have an innate dislike of contentious political battles, that to me is an issue the Republicans can use against Governor Edwards. The other thing which, in my opinion, hurts Governor Edwards, this is really more elemental. This is how Louisiana is changing as we speak. In the old days, Louisiana was a state where you basically had to be a really, really good Republican candidate facing a Democratic field in disarray to have even a prayer of a chance of winning. Dave Treen managed to do it barely, lost. Paul Hardy managed to do it, lost. Fox McKithen barely survived the 1991 Democratic landslide. Starting around Hurricane Katrina, however, Republican fortunes changed drastically to the point now to where it takes a special Democrat to be able to win statewide. And I would argue that what happened in Governor Edwards' 2015 is he appropriated just enough conservative messaging, particularly when you're talking about abortion and guns, to where he was thought of as a pseudo-Republican candidate. Still, it's important to realize that the political tectonics of Louisiana have changed, and to put it in concrete terms, since he was elected governor of Louisiana, there are 67,000 less registered Democrats than there were when he was inaugurated. There are 96,000 more Republicans, 28,000 more independents, out of a denominator of 3 million voters. So the important thing about that to realize is that Democrats, particularly the constituency of white Democrats, keeps hemorrhaging. And if you were to look at voter registration stats, which come out once a month on the Secretary of State site, you'll see a continued diminution in the number of registered Democrats in the state. That is an underlying political tectonic shift that Governor Edwards has to be conscious of, because it means that voters are less and less friendly towards Democratic candidates, because as the older people who might have liked Governor Edwin Edwards and John Breaux they might have supported that type of Democrat. Those Democrats, through attrition, are becoming less and less and less. So you're having a more Republican constituency taking over. So that is a fundamental fact that Governor Edwards has to contend with, is that this is a state that not only did President Trump carry, but registered Republicans are getting ever closer to lapping the number of registered Democrats in the state. The other thing, too, which I think is closely, in my opinion, tied into the law, change in voter registration, when I'm talking about legislative strength, you know, one of the things that's been fascinating is since Governor Edwards was inaugurated, there have been 22 new House members elected in special elections or who went in unopposed. The thing about those 22 who are coming in is that by and large it is a more conservative group than was elected in 2015. To use a couple specifics, he lost 3 Democratic seats in the state House in places like Minden and Sulphur, which normally might have voted Democratic for the House without much incident. Well, now those are Republican seats. Equally as detrimental to Governor Edwards is that some of the Republicans who have left the House, Rob Shadwan is one who immediately comes to mind, are being replaced by more conservatives. So what that means is that the legislative climate for Governor Edwards with regards to who is sitting in those 144 House and Senate seats is less friendly than it was in January 2016, which means that his life is certainly not going to be any easier this year, nor if he were to be reelected would it be easier next year. So these are the pros and cons of why I could see Governor Edwards being reelected versus not being reelected. Now we get to the good stuff. The poll I conducted, there were several things we focused on. The main was the horse race aspect of the governor's race, as well as what voters in Louisiana think of President Trump, and what voters in Louisiana think about Governor Edwards vis-a-vis the business climate here in Louisiana. One of the things that's interesting about Louisiana is that while President Trump has seen a diminution in his popularity nationally, according to the last Real Clear Politics average, it was 44% compared to the 46% that he received in the presidential election and compared to the 45% Republican congressional candidates received last year in the Democratic landslide. But compared to all that, President Trump's numbers have held up pretty solidly here in Louisiana. He carried the state 58-38. Right now, his approval rating is 54-37. It's a little bit less, but it's still pretty solid. And when you compare that against the context of his popularity dropping a couple percent since he got elected relative to his share of the popular vote, going from 58 to 54%, in my opinion, is statistically insignificant when you consider that his popularity has diminished across the nation. By 39 to 35% margin, respondents think that Governor Edwards is good for the business climate here in Louisiana. Interesting note, and by the way, there is a big dichotomy if you look in the different regions of Louisiana as to how they responded. That'll be a point I'm going to talk about later on in this poll about what this poll means. So the first thing I did was I did a ballot test where I put John Bel Edwards against both Abraham and Risponi. So despite what you've seen from the other polls, where in my opinion there's probably been some leading language that might be pushing people towards one response or another, my polls are very vanilla. All I do is ask people, if the election were held today, which candidate would you support? I give the name and the party affiliation. In other words, I'm replicating the general election environment. Those numbers show right now that Governor Edwards is sitting at 38%, Ralph Abraham is sitting at 23%, Eddie Risponi at 7%, 32% are undecided. The next part of the poll, however, was we simulated what a runoff would look like between Edwards Abraham and Edwards Risponi. So if we were to put John Bel Edwards up against Ralph Abraham, he has a narrow 40 to 36% lead, 24% are undecided. If we were to put Governor Edwards up against Eddie Risponi, a 41 to 28 lead, 31% undecided. 38, 40, 41, an incumbent governor of Louisiana with no other Democratic opposition. I consider those weak numbers. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about anemic support. Because you have to appreciate that what's been going on, the context as we speak today, in May 1st, is that there's really been a non-governor's race, and Facebook ads don't count. In terms of what the average voter would see or hear, which, to be honest with you, would be TV ads. There's a big blank going on in the governor's race. There's sporadic coverage from the news media, but there's not a race yet, and for good reason. Candidates are raising money. They don't want to fire their shots too early and run out of money before appropriate. So you don't really have much of a race going on right now. So given that you have an incumbent governor who is hovering around the upper 30s, low 40s, I think that's bad. When I'm talking about inelastic support, the thing that I found interesting is regardless of what combination of candidate or candidates you put Governor Edwards against, his numbers are pretty static. 38, 40, and 41 to me is not very impressive. And one of the things I would add too is, I look at the undecideds on this. You'll notice how the undecided jumped 7 points when you compared Abraham against Rispone. I look at it this way. Eddie Rispone has an impressive war chest. He, however, has not yet turned it loose. So really outside of Baton Rouge and certainly outside of the petrochemical and industrial corridor, he's not really a known factor yet. So the only thing he has working for him is, the fact that he's a Republican and he's a businessman, but he's not really a known factor yet. One advantage that Ralph Abraham has, and my polling showed this if you looked at the Alexandria and Monroe media markets, is that he is popular with his voters. Of course, Alexandria and Monroe are far from being what it takes to win a statewide office in Louisiana, but nevertheless, if you are a congressman from those media markets and they are loyal to their incumbents, that does give Ralph Abraham a head start right now. So anyway, Governor Edwards has inelastic support. The other thing which I think is important to appreciate, this to me is going to be what's going to be how the race for governor is defined. So Jim had mentioned early on in his speech about 47% of the Riley survey felt that Louisiana was moving in the right direction. It's certainly not a bad number, but in my opinion, it's less than 50%. What I found interesting was not just the fact that you had a narrow 39 to 35 plurality for those who think that Governor Edwards has been good for the business community. The numbers vary tremendously depending on what part of the state you're talking about. My theory about the why part is this. I would argue that the petrochemical boom that has been occurring in various parts of Louisiana, as well as connections to the national economy, that's something that has more of a disproportionate impact in places such as Baton Rouge and New Orleans and Lake Charles. And I noticed when I was looking not only at the governor's race numbers, but the optimism numbers, or more specifically, what people thought about Governor Edwards vis-a-vis the business climate, his numbers were better in those three media markets. And so my theory is if the economy is humming and there's industrial expansion going on, you're less likely to rock the vote. You want to be more comfortable with supporting the incumbent. And by the way, a similar sentiment was apparent in the presidential election in 2016, where areas such as the suburbs of Houston and Atlanta and Dallas, which you stereotypically would have thought of as Republican areas, they actually displayed uncharacteristically high support for Hillary Clinton because, in my opinion, the economy was doing well there, therefore people didn't want to rock the boat. Conversely, if you were to look at a place like Cleveland or Detroit or Duluth, Minnesota, or other areas that have seen various economic forces affecting them and not in a positive way, those were voters who were more anxious and therefore more receptive to Donald Trump's message. So a variation of that is what I'm seeing here within Louisiana, and I think that's going to play out in the governor's race. The other thing that's interesting too when you're talking about the kind of the variation by region is that once you got into places like Alexandria and Shreveport, the numbers were much less optimistic about Governor Edwards being good for the business climate. So I see a big dichotomy depending on what part of the state you're talking about as to if they're happy with the way things are going and they're therefore going to vote for John Bell again, or if they are anxious about the way things are going and they're therefore receptive to one of the Republican candidates. Now, one of the things I want to do kind of to close up my presentation, of course I'd be more than happy to take questions. Anytime I see a poll in Louisiana, the first thing I do is dive into the crosstabs because undecided to me is an amorphous blob, but given all the polling I've done, I can make some assumptions about where some of those undecideds are going to go. I can give you a spin-free assessment of where I think the governor's race really is. What I did, in other words, is on the Edwards and Risponi and Abraham numbers, I took a look at the undecideds. Black undecideds, I allocated those to John Bell Edwards because in practice, he's going to get probably 95% of that vote. Political Reality 101. I also took a look at the Republican undecideds. Given that Governor Edwards polls poorly amongst registered Republicans, I allocated nearly all of that vote to either Abraham or Risponi. So that's the generic Republicans number that you see right now. So once you basically have existing political partisan gravities reassert themselves, which of course will happen later in September and October, I see this as a 45-42 primary race. And by the way, one of the things that I've not even accounted for here, because of course we don't have a complete field until qualifying, you're also going to have a field or a series of also-rans. In other words, 5 to 10 additional candidates who run for governor. Basically, they have only about enough money to pay their qualifying fee. However, they in the aggregate will pull 3 to 5% of the vote. That 3 to 5% of the vote, in my opinion, will probably force a runoff on its own. But I think that given the numbers I'm seeing with regards to Governor Edwards, regardless of how you poll him, I think the true number that he's sitting at right now is about 45%, and the Republicans are not far behind. And so you're talking about a relatively narrow sliver of white Democrats and white independents who are the game changers, or the game deciders, so to speak. So that's really how I see the race, and of course, why talk about 1,000 words when I can just put it in one quick pithy sentence? A guaranteed runoff. This reminds me, I've been having interviews with reporters where they're engaging me, in my opinion, in this nonsensical topic, just like they did in 2014 when they tried to delude themselves into believing that Mary Landrieu was going to win without a runoff, which I never believed for a millisecond, because polling I did going all the way back to 2011 showed that her vote for the Affordable Care Act was very damaging to her politically, and she never recovered. So given that you have this parlor talk amongst reporters, with all due respect to them, right now about if Governor Edwards can win without a runoff, I don't see it. So that's my presentation. I'd be more than happy to take any questions.
Given that the scope of the petrochemical industry is really multinational, what's important to operate effectively here in Louisiana, as well as in the rest of the country and the rest of the world, is to have a healthy business climate. So the healthy business climate is one of the issues that I had tested in my poll, as well as where the candidates stand with the voters right now. And of course, who is elected governor this fall will certainly have an important bearing on how effectively the petrochemical industry can operate here in Louisiana, because of course the governor of Louisiana traditionally has been a very powerful official.
Ethylene oxide is a chemical that's used mainly in the sterilization of hospital surgical supplies. Stuff that can't be used or can't be steamed, such as tubings and so on and so forth. Actually, ethylene oxide is used to actually sterilize them in medical procedures.
What is the issue surrounding it and the manufacture of that here in Louisiana?
Well, as far as Louisiana goes, we actually don't have a sterilization plant, but we do have lots of facilities that use and utilize the chemical. So in 2014, EPA released a report, which was released in 2017, that basically set the standard for ethylene oxide a little bit lower than what it currently is. So I just want to give everybody an update today on where LDEQ is and where our relationship with EPA is regarding ethylene oxide.
We do have what we call the ethylene oxide tree. But as you can see, ethylene oxide is a very versatile, basic building block of chemistry. And it's used primarily in a lot of industrial manufacturing operations to make other chemistries. It goes into markets in the building construction, it's in polyester fiber, it's in clothing, it's in upholsteries, it's in automobile fluids, antifreeze, brake fluids, it's in the safety glass in cars, household industrial cleansers, pharmaceuticals, pharmaceutical ointments, cosmetics, shampoos, de-icing solutions. It's this last use that I mentioned that has become the kind of the poster child and probably why we're discussing the ethylene oxide issue, and that's used in the sterilization of medical devices. This is where this issue kind of developed, and it has really mushroomed into something that's being very difficult to manage from an issue perspective, but it's everywhere. So, and appreciate all of y'all using it.
Brenda, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah.
as a major manufacturer? And I think there's several other represented in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rudy, I think you said it well. I mean, I think few people understand truly how important ethylene oxide is, not just to the chemical industry, but to all industry in general. You know, it's remarkable when you take ethylene oxide and you react it with another molecule. I mean, this is a beautiful, it's chemistry at work, but it offers tremendous flexibility and functionality. And this is the point in the speech where I admit that I'm not a technical person. And so the more I talk about molecules, the more trouble I'm going to get into. I'm a commercial guy, so I just have the responsibility for selling it. But I do marvel the fact that ethylene oxide is it's over 100 years old. And yet it still stands as the backbone, the key building block for so many industries, from healthcare to transportation to consumer products. And the reason is because it's an incredibly versatile molecule. And the critical functionality that our customers, and I've seen some of my peers in the room, their customers, the critical functionality they're looking for often comes from EO, or more precisely, the derivatives of ethylene oxide. And so just to take a few examples in my world, surfactants, surface acting agents, are one of the largest derivatives of ethylene oxide. This is a very interesting chemistry because it technically manages the oil and water interface. So think soap. The way soap feels is driven by the surfactant package. I've got a 3-year-old daughter at home, and I give her a bath, and I can tell how clean my child is based on the foam on her body, and that foam is controlled by the surfactant package. And so it goes beyond personal care. In oil and gas, you have oil that sticks to rocks, and so using a surfactant, you can dislodge it and get more production out of existing wells, and that's good for the economy. And one of the best examples, the one that Rudy, you mentioned, was in pharmaceuticals. You know, there's no industry that's more regulated, that's more focused on safety than pharma. And if you think about it, EO derivatives like polyethylene glycol, these are products that are the product of choice in whether it's laxatives to the gel caps for cold medicine. And so if you think about this, you know, and you think about what we're here today, the reason we're here is that there's the risk of regulation limiting the ability to produce EO. What you're doing is you're driving the industries to move away from the product of choice that drives the functionality that is needed towards other alternatives. And yeah, there will be other alternatives, but the challenge is that, as in the pharma case, either they're less effective or they may have other side effects. And if you think about pharmaceuticals, the whole purpose is to enable patient lives. And so you're kind of counter to that. And so I think, to your point, Rudy, and these go everywhere, and the reason they go everywhere is because they're the product of choice, they're safe and in the right conditions, and they work.
So I think the takeaway there is that it would be impossible for you to live your life without interacting daily with molecules that are made with EO. In my small little plant, and I mean, you know, we're relatively small compared to Dow, but we make 3 molecules that go into the manufacture of a Coca-Cola can, if you think about that. We make molecules that are used to clean up drinking water. So again, it would be, you know, and we make dozens more, but it would be absolutely impossible to go through your day without interacting with the EO in some way. So Brendy, I'll throw the next one to you also. I know that Dow and the other manufacturers that are represented here have strong product stewardship programs to ensure that, you know, all of your customers handle EO safely, and I've been on the receiving end of a couple of those audits. But would you please tell us more about that program?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very proud of our product stewardship approach. In fact, Dow was the first company to actually establish a product steward role in the 70s. So this is something that's foundational to our business. And, you know, when we think of product stewardship, you know, certainly the most common definition is you are concerned with advancing the employee health, safety, and environment of the products as they're manufactured. But at Dow, we take it a step further and focus on the sustainable use of these products throughout the value chain. What this means is not only do we make sure that the appropriate processes and policies and training and information relative to the products are available and accessible, so that people use the products in the right way. But at Dow, we actually, we continuously evaluate and assess our products, how they're used and where they go. In fact, we, anytime a new product is created, anytime we enter into a new market, anytime we do anything that we haven't done before, we conduct this assessment to determine, can we, should we, and if so, how should we, with the goal of driving employee environmental health and safety throughout the value chain. And I think this is critical in driving how we operationally act. But strategically, product stewardship is also aligned to our strategy. Several years ago, Dow announced its 2025 sustainability goals, which sets a North Star for the type of company and that we want to be in 2025 from a sustainable perspective, and product stewardship is a key lever. So this drives this behavior of continuous improvement, continuous drive towards health and safety, and continuing to drive a more sustainable product, where the vision is that by 2025, we are making significant progress towards every product that we manufacture and supply to our value chains is contributing to a more safe and sustainable planet.
Thank you. Dr. Brown. The EPA last fall put out the National Air Toxics Assessment, and it specifically called out EO. Could you please tell us a little bit about that and the subsequent actions taken by EPA and LDEQ?
So when I first took this job, the governor and I from the same little small hometown. So I spent 4 years under Governor Blanco and thought I had done my government service, kind of like a veteran. You're done. But we're from the same little small hometown, and he called and asked if I would come and do this. And I said I'd do it for two reasons. One, as a service to him, because when I was in high school, his dad was the sheriff of Tangipahoa Parish, took care of all of us. And as a service to the residents of the state of Louisiana. And the first day in office, somebody brought in the 2010 NADA report that showed one facility in the entire United States that produced one chemical that went from a non-cancerous standard of 857 micrograms per cubic meter to a cancerous number, a risk value of 0.2 micrograms per cubic meter. It was a very poor job of communicating what NADA actually was, that it's not used to set standards. It's a guide, it's a risk factor, but it's very difficult to communicate risk. People don't understand the difference between risk and rate. So for the last 3 years, we have worked through lots of issues with my EPA counterparts on all levels. As a matter of fact, the Office of Research and Development, they don't want to hear me on the other end of their phone because they left me by myself, and they know that. And I'm like, well, what are y'all going to do? Are y'all going to take the lead in setting a standard? Because I got people wearing T-shirts with a number on them. That's a risk value. So it must have been 6 months ago, I got a call from the director of the Office of Air and Radiation, and he goes, what can we do to help? And I'm like, you don't understand. We've been doing this for 2.5 years. We've made lots of progress. So then last fall, as a matter of fact, last August, we were trying to push back this latest NADA because we don't want to make the same mistakes that we made the first time. How do you communicate this? You're going from a number for EO that was at 1 microgram per cubic meter to 0.02. My comment to them was it might as well be 0. And so I get a call, and my counterparts at, I didn't see Jorge here. Okay, that's you're smiling. So I get a call from my Region 6 counterparts. I know Erin is in here, so she knows the story. And they go, can you come to Dallas? We want to talk about the next NADA. And I'm like, can we push that back a little bit till we get this right? So I fly in, and they're trying to explain to me why we got to release this data now. Well, all of the issues right outside Chicago had already taken off. ATSDR had already done a study, and the next thing you know, this sterilization plant right there in, I guess it's Deer Park or whatever it is under fire. And if you've been keeping up with that, you know that the Chicago Tribune had to retract every story that they wrote because they actually didn't use prudence as they went through this process. So I go to Dallas and there's these models. Okay, so I've got 5 of the top 10 plants that are on their list right here in this state, right? So with 2010, I had the only one in the country, and now I got 5 of the top 10 right here in Louisiana. So I looked at the models, and to be honest with you, I won't tell you who it is, but one of them had a model that exceeded 10 miles in width. So it might as well be 0, right? So we sit, we talk, how do we communicate this? Because we don't want to make the same mistakes. So I brought in all the companies that were on the list. And I don't want to get into what we talked about, but it was a two-pronged strategy that seemed to have gotten us ahead of the curve. As a matter of fact, I'll talk a little bit more about a recent meeting that I had. But the NADA information that was released regarding EO, just basically in the state of Louisiana, because we had this first one, people are now just realizing that EO is on the horizon. Now, there's a third one in the queue that I think is going to be held off. But what my counterparts in Washington understand is you can't leave us out here trying to manage the regulated community and the general public and the elected officials, because all 3 of them are part of the puzzle. And either one of them can go off in a direction that you can't control. So that's kind of where we are, but I think we got a very effective strategy when it comes to EO. And I think as we get into the request for correction that my folks on the end of the table have undertaken, and we start looking at the science, because if you start looking at a shortage of medical supplies or medical equipment, everybody out there will tell you they'd rather have to deal with long-term exposure than to have an unsterilized piece of material stuck in your body. And so we're going to have to work our way through this slowly, but we got to do it in a way that the folks that are impacted understand the difference between risk and rate and real actual numbers. And I'll tell you a little bit more about some other studies that I know might be helpful to you as you go through the process. And what we're doing and what my counterparts in Texas are doing, I think will all get us to a positive endpoint. The issue is can we hold on, keep it in the middle of the road until we get there? Because it may not be tomorrow. It may be a year from now or 2 years from now. So,
ethylene oxide is a key component, a building block in chemistry. It's made, it's part of a lot of products that we use on a daily basis, and just being able to use it and continue to use it is very important to the industry.
Today I was here to talk about the importance of ethylene oxide, and most importantly the derivatives of ethylene oxide, to not just the chemical industry but industries in general, from healthcare to transportation to consumer products. This is a critical molecule, and the features and benefits are critical to sustaining the way in which we know the world today.
Issues resolve around some faulty information that the EPA some studies have conducted that set the air ambient levels way beyond and way below what even we exhale as human beings. And it's very difficult for industry to comply with those standards that they are looking at and considering.
What kind of an impact could that have on Louisiana?
Well, Louisiana is a very high producer of ethylene oxide, and we also use a lot of ethylene oxide in other products and chemistries that we make.
The bottom line is we have an industrial corridor, and by lowering that number, I want actually the plants that are identified as producing or using ethylene oxide to start taking proactive measures and ways to actually reduce and address the new number.
We, really do want every stakeholder to know what to expect from us and in what time frame. Having certainty really does provide, it allows all of us together to, fully protect the environment and public health and also continue to grow the economy. And for the regulated community specifically, we want to provide you certainty that EPA will reach timely decisions on permits and enforcement actions and give you the ability to appropriately allocate your resources and grow your businesses and also grow the economy. Certainty is really important to the administrator and to us in the region, just to make sure that everyone knows what's expected of you. And another priority is making sure we're accurately and precisely communicating risk to any affected communities should any environmental incidents occur. So one way we want to provide certainty to you is through our EPA programs. We want you to know how the EPA permitting process works and how long that process can take. We want to ensure that there's consistency and certainty regarding that permitting process. And so in order to do that, we've been working to streamline our processes and modernize our reporting tools and identify any undue burdens and eliminate any duplicative requirements. So in streamlining our permitting process, our goal is to reach permitting related decisions within 6 months by September 30th, 2022. So that's not your application is approved within 6 months, but it is a thumbs up or a thumbs down on whether or not that application is complete and within that time frame. And so, we know that having a dependable time frame will help you all in your decision-making and planning processes, and we hope that being able to get that 6 months time frame as the standard for getting permits through EPA will really help with that. We're modernizing our reporting processes and eliminating duplicative reporting requirements. And one recent example is just a few weeks ago, EPA proposed amendments to the chemical data reporting rule. These changes will better support our data collection efforts, align reporting with the TSCA amendments by requiring that confidentiality claims be substantiated, and make chemical reporting easier by streamlining complex submissions. We're also working with businesses to ensure compliance, and we're engaging with states and tribes to help develop their compliance initiatives. We're focusing on compliance to really try to trim down that time between the identification of a violation and the correction of that violation. We're not just relying on enforcement. We want to utilize the full range of compliance assurance tools available to us to guarantee that compliance. And as I said, one of Administrator Wheeler's top priorities is risk communication, and we're also using that to provide certainty to our stakeholders. Really, risk communication truly goes to the core of EPA's mission of protecting environment and public health. As the nation's regulator, we at EPA need to speak with one voice, and we need to get you the right information when it's available, and if that information changes, we need to get you that new information as soon as we can. And when emergencies happen, which we all know they do, we need to quickly and accurately communicate those risks to all those impacted. So we also need to have clear rules in place to be able to properly provide certainty to our stakeholders, and I can only assume you're all interested in the progress EPA has made in regards to chemical safety. So a few things on that. The EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Prevention Pollution, OCSPP, has been busy implementing TSCA, meeting statutory deadlines, and maintaining regulations and assessments. EPA has implemented rules regarding the prioritization process, the risk evaluation process, and the TSCA inventory. We've developed a new fees program, and we're working on completing the draft risk evaluation for the first 10 chemicals. And EPA also published a final strategy to reduce animal testing, as well as a final mercury reporting rule. And for new chemicals, EPA is reviewing submissions consistent with TSCA while increasing decision transparency. We have also announced strategies to address ethylene oxide and PFAS. And as you just heard on the previous panel, there's quite a bit happening with ethylene oxide at both the state and federal level. The 2014 National Air Toxic Assessment, the NATA, identified areas of the country where there's an acceptable risk associated with the emissions from facilities manufacturing or using ethylene oxide. And EPA announced that we're taking a two-pronged approach to address address that risk by first prioritizing a subset of facilities for action in the short term and developing rulemaking in the long term.
I don't have too much to add from what Secretary Brown said earlier on the panel, but we're looking forward to continue to working with Secretary Brown and other states and stakeholders on the ethylene oxide issue, and to help get that number out there that makes the most sense and is based on sound, accurate science.
The chemical industry in Louisiana is extremely important. One of the largest employers in our state. We have created and provided high-paying jobs for tens of thousands of Louisianians for well over 100 years. We are very blessed in Louisiana to have natural resources, great geography, a strong workforce, and the industry really takes all of those attributes and brings them together for the benefit of Louisianians in the form of jobs, and then for the benefit of the world in the products that we produce.
The chemical industry in Louisiana, we are one of the largest economic engines for the state. Not only do we provide outstanding careers and economic growth, we also give back tremendously. If you look at our charitable contributions, the amount of time that our employees and leaders give back in leadership and in charitable giving and making our state greater is enormous. That's why for us, working to help people understand the industrial tax exemption program, making sure they understand that vehicles like this are absolutely important for us to continue to grow, bring in new jobs, and also, more importantly, modernize our facilities so that we're prepared to stay here and be an economic engine for the next 40 years.
When we create jobs in the chemical industry in Louisiana, we create more than one job. For every job we create, it's varying factors on exactly which industry you're in, but it's about 6 more jobs that get created in other industries. So it's an excellent growth engine for the state. The other thing I think that's important is to realize that the companies understand we only succeed if the communities we live in succeed. And so we're here to work with the communities and to do the things that are necessary so that the communities see the same success that we do.
What we do is important to everyday life. From the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, even while you're sleeping, it involves chemicals.
If people have questions like more information, what should they do?
Just go to lca.org, and there's a whole listing of our organization there. There's numbers on how to contact me or any members of our staff.